Okay, so I think it's pretty safe to say that in the modern world, in the first world, the average person has a lot of mental strife. They have many issues to face, whether it be depression, anxiety, whatever, right? And although you could look into the thousands of possible factors as to why that is, what I think is really interesting is to look at the average person's response to that. And I think when you do that, when you examine that, you see that society has become increasingly focused on and dependent on distractions. Of course, distractions have always been a part of civilization, right? But I don't think they've ever been this prevalent. And it can definitely be argued that a major cause of this is that in the first world, we have our survival needs met. In that we don't really have to worry about food, water, shelter, things like that. Things our ancestors had to worry about on a daily basis. Even if you're living paycheck to paycheck, there's still a safety net. And the threat of death isn't as present as it used to be. And what's really interesting is that when you look throughout history and examine some of our greatest thinkers and philosophers and such as, you realize that a lot of them had a similar privilege. In fact, the most of them had a similar privilege in that they didn't have to worry about survival needs. Of course, that's partially because they had more time to consider the greater questions. But it's also because when you're surviving day to day, your purpose is very clear, right? The goal is clear. The goal is to survive. What you need to do that is also pretty clear. You have a very clear thing to chase after. When that's resolved, you have to face the question of your purpose, or your true will, whatever you may call it. What fulfills you in this life, the reason you're here, what you'd be completely fine devoting all of your energy and life force to, right? So this question arises when you're in moments of stillness, when you're in moments where you're pretty much just staring at the wall, where you don't have distractions. The problem with this, though, is that it's a very unpleasant event. It's not a pleasant activity because it kind of forces you to look at your life from the grand scheme. And it also forces you to consider mortality, which most people in our modern world don't really think about. You could argue a lot for society is designed around making us not think about our own mortality, right? Because if you're considering your purpose, you have to look at your life. And I think for the majority of people, that's not very pleasant because they're probably not satisfied with their life. That's just human nature. We always want more. We always think we could do better. So we're never satisfied. So these thoughts can manifest in different ways. And it makes you consider the fact that you're going to die, that you have a limited amount of time. For someone like me, it manifests itself through FOMO, through anxiety, through fear that I'm missing out and that I have a very limited amount of time and I'm wasting it. That I'm just biding my time, screwing around. And what happens when those thoughts arise? Well, obviously, you try to distract yourself. You get a phone, you try to go get a snack. You do whatever it takes to not sit there and deal with it because it's the most unpleasant thing. And even looking at, let's say, a video that is getting you angry, it's getting you pissed off, it's making, or something that is making you sad, you'd prefer that because at least it's making you feel something that you can be sure of. And you don't have to face this mysterious question. But it's really important that you face this question because what can happen if you don't is that you become blinded. You see, when you live a life of distractions, you obviously are distracted. So what can happen is you're led astray onto a path that was not intended for you. But since you're blinded, you won't realize that until the very end when you're on your deathbed and you have to look at your past. You have to consider the question of purpose. And this time, it's in the past sense, not in the present sense, because you can no longer control it. You're looking back at your life, at all your memories, all you've accomplished, if you've accomplished anything. And you have to ask yourself, did I fulfill my purpose? And if you live a life with distractions, I can almost guarantee you that you're going to die in regret. Because you're going to die and you're going to realize that I didn't. And I think dying in regret, in that form of regret, because of course everyone has regret. Everyone probably dies with some form of regret. But the regret I'm talking about is so substantial. Dying with that, I view as one of the most depressing things that could happen to a person. So then, of course, the question that comes from that is, how do you deal with it, right? And I think there's two ways to sort of look at it. So on the surface level, what you can kind of do is simulate those survival needs, the struggle for survival, through activities that make you kind of feel your mortality, that make you face mortality. That's why things like exercise, hard exercise, running are really good, because it puts you in that state of simulated survival. Even activities where you actually are in danger, like let's say mountaineering, something like that, that's dangerous. That's good because it mutes that part of your brain. You get the natural dopamine and endorphins and serotonin that you're supposed to be getting, right? So that's great for you. But the problem is that the question still lingers there, because you're solving the symptoms, or you're not really solving the root cause of what your purpose is, right? And of course, to do that, you have to sit with the question. You have to sit in that inactivity, during this moment of inactivity. You have to sit with the stillness and confront the question. But that's easier said than done, right? And I think there's a process that can kind of help with this. I think during long stretches of inactivity, let's say during vacation or whatever it may be, right? It's very helpful to go through an ascetic process, an ascetic program, or ascetic, however you want to see them. I see them, but I don't believe them, right? Whatever. And what that means is depriving of yourself of material pleasures. So that would entail no scrolling, no video games, no junk food, no freaky shit, none of that, right? None of the instant gratification that gives you no benefit and gives you this artificial sense of accomplishment. This does a couple things. I mean, first of all, it definitely gives you a temporary sense of purpose. When you're seeking that, when you're breaking an addiction, you definitely feel extremely productive, because you're doing something good. That's the second part. You're doing something good. Even if you fail at finding your purpose through this, you still did a net positive to your life and cutting out these distractions and influences. And it definitely offers a temporary sense of purpose. I can attest to that. If you don't have your life figured out, being focused, putting all your attention onto something like that can be very helpful. But on top of that, it can help you find your purpose. Because of course you're going to be more inclined to sit with the stillness. It's going to be less intimidating to face it. And emphasis on as intimidating, because it will still be very difficult. It's not easy. It will never be easy. But beginning the process will be easier, because you won't have those distractions at your side pulling you away like demons, right? Like giving you urges to not face that question, to live in temporary pleasure and sin and instant gratification, in order to just live in the moment, not consider the true implications of what you're doing. So you combine that process with a form of meditation and exercise. And what you do is that you sit with the stillness and you let the thoughts rise. And then you journal about them, you analyze them, you examine them. And through this process, what should happen is you discover your true, or at least get a better sense of your true desires and true fears. And through that, your purpose should become somewhat clear. When you're in these moments, whatever thoughts that come up that feel right, there's something right about them. It can't be explained. It's just something you feel. Those thoughts, those activities, you have to explore them. You have to research them and study them and try them out. You have to experiment. And that's how you find your purpose, right? It's a feeling that you get from doing something. and experimenting with various things. Because you don't want to fall in the trap of missing out on something that you have been truly content doing, but you missed out on because you never gave it a try, out of pure laziness or usually fear. And instead, you follow a career that you really didn't have any passion for, but hey, it was the right thing to do. It offered money, it offered status, whatever. So you did it, and now you're in that state I mentioned earlier of regret. So a lot of people are going to scoff at this, right? Because they don't really take life seriously. And to a certain extent, it is beneficial to not take life so seriously. But the way I view it is that no one's truly sure if we have something after this. I think we do. I don't think this is our only life, but I will never be sure of that. And even if it isn't our only life, living as if it is will prevent that sense of regret at the end and will give you a fulfilled life. So I recommend that process.